Hey, princess, think you can handle real weapons, or should we get you a toy wrench? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice echoed across the armament maintenance hangar at Davis-Monthan Air Base, Arizona, cutting through the steady hum of air compressors and the heavy scent of CLP sun oil. 12 airmen in the hangar turned to look toward Airman First Class Megan Doyle, who stood beside an A-10 Thunderbolt with one hand gripping a precision-calibrated torque wrench, the other checking the ammunition feed chute of the GAU-8 Avenger 30mm cannon. Doyle didn't stop her work, eyes still focused on checking barrel alignment tolerances, while her fingers moved with mechanical precision through the inspection checklist, marking off each safety protocol with the thoroughness of someone who had performed this procedure thousands of times. The morning sun streamed through the hangar's high windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor, where million-dollar aircraft waited for their daily maintenance routines. Rodriguez stepped closer, his boots clicking against the concrete floor, while Chief Master Sergeant Williams stood near the tool crib, slowly tapping his pen against his clipboard and checking his watch, waiting to see how the newest maintenance trainee would handle the pressure. The chief had seen plenty of new airmen come through these doors, but something about Doyle's methodical approach caught his attention in ways he couldn't quite explain. "All personnel, stand fast for unscheduled command inspection," crackled through the radio, just as the hangar's red warning light suddenly flashed on, bathing everything in an urgent crimson glow. The sound of multiple conversations died instantly. Every airman in the facility knew what an unscheduled inspection meant. Someone higher up the chain was making an unexpected visit, and that usually spelled trouble for somebody. Doyle continued her work, seemingly unfazed by the announcement, while Rodriguez's confident smirk faltered for just a moment. Chief Williams set down his clipboard and walked toward the small group gathered around the A-10. At 62 years old, Williams had spent more time around military aircraft than most people spent in their entire careers. He'd seen combat deployments, training accidents, and every type of personality the Air Force could produce. What he hadn't seen in quite some time was someone who handled weapons systems with the kind of unconscious competence that Doyle displayed. "Rodriguez," the chief said quietly, "what's the situation here?" "Just making sure our new trainee understands the complexity of what we do here, Chief," Rodriguez replied, his tone suggesting this was routine orientation. "Can't have someone working on combat systems without proper respect for the equipment." Doyle finally looked up from her work, meeting the chief's eyes directly. "Chief, I've completed the initial inspection of the GAU-8 system. Barrel alignment is within tolerances, ammunition feed mechanism shows no signs of wear, and all safety protocols have been verified." Her voice carried none of the nervousness that typically characterized new personnel under scrutiny. Williams nodded slowly. In 30-plus years of military service, he'd developed an instinct for reading people. Something about Doyle's bearing, the way she held herself, the confidence in her voice when discussing technical specifications. It all suggested experience that went far beyond what her personnel file indicated. "And the torque specifications?" Williams asked, testing her knowledge. "Barrel nuts require 75 foot-pounds of torque," Doyle answered without hesitation. "Feed mechanism bolts are 45 foot-pounds, and the ammunition chute connections are 35 foot-pounds. All measurements verified with calibrated equipment." Rodriguez's expression shifted slightly. Those weren't specifications that someone learned from a basic technical manual. They were the kind of details that came from hands-on experience, repeated over months or years of actual maintenance work. The hangar's main door opened with a metallic clang, and Technical Sergeant Lisa Park entered, carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone who had important business to conduct. Park had been the non-commissioned officer in charge of the maintenance section for 2 years, and her reputation for thoroughness was well established throughout the squadron. "Morning, Chief," Park said, nodding to Williams before her gaze settled on the group around the aircraft. "How's our newest team member settling in?" "Just fine, Sergeant Park," Williams replied. Doyle here was just demonstrating her knowledge of the GAU-8 system. Park's eyes lingered on Doyle for a moment longer than seemed necessary. "Excellent. We need people who understand the importance of proper procedures." She paused, consulting her folder. "Speaking of which, I've got some paperwork that needs attention." "Chief, when you have a moment," the radio crackled again. Maintenance control to Hangar 7. Be advised, Colonel Morrison is en route for facility inspection. Estimated arrival in 15 minutes. A collective tension rippled through the hangar. Colonel Morrison commanded the entire squadron, and his inspections were legendary for their attention to detail. More than one career had been altered by his findings during these visits. Rodriguez straightened his uniform and looked around the hangar with new urgency. All right, people, let's make sure everything is squared away. Doyle, I want you to focus on basic cleaning tasks. Leave the complex work to more experienced personnel. Chief Williams raised an eyebrow. Rodriguez, she just demonstrated solid knowledge of the system specifications. Why not let her continue with the inspection she started? Because, Chief, complex systems require experience that comes from deployment and real-world application, Rodriguez replied, his voice carrying an edge of authority. I'm sure Doyle is competent with basic maintenance, but troubleshooting combat systems requires a different level of understanding. Doyle set down her torque wrench with deliberate care. Sergeant Rodriguez, what specific experience do you think I'm lacking? The question hung in the air with surprising weight. Several other airmen had stopped their work to listen, sensing that this conversation was heading somewhere significant. Rodriguez stepped closer, clearly intending to make his point in front of the gathered personnel. Combat systems aren't learned from textbooks, airman. They're learned from deployment experience, from working under pressure, from understanding what happens when lives depend on your work. I understand, Doyle replied calmly. And what deployment experience qualifies you to make that assessment? The question caught Rodriguez off guard. His personnel file showed 2 deployments to Qatar, primarily working on transport aircraft maintenance. Solid experience, but nothing that would be considered high-intensity combat operations. Chief Williams watched the exchange with growing interest. Something about Doyle's questions suggested she wasn't just pushing back against Rodriguez's authority. She was probing his credentials with the confidence of someone who had her own foundation to stand on. I've completed 2 combat deployments, Rodriguez answered, his voice becoming more defensive. What about you, airman? What makes you think you can question my experience? Before Doyle could answer, Senior Airman Travis Webb approached the group. Webb had been working quietly in the corner of the hangar, but the raised voices had drawn his attention. At 24 years old, Webb presented himself as an enthusiastic, hard-working airman who stayed out of conflicts and focused on his assigned tasks. Hey, sorry to interrupt, Webb said with a friendly smile. Rodriguez, you wanted me to check on the ammunition inventory after I finished with the hydraulic systems? Rodriguez nodded, seeming grateful for the interruption. Right, Webb, take care of that. And make sure everything is properly documented for the colonel's inspection. Webb's eyes flicked briefly to Doyle, and for just a moment, his friendly expression seemed to calculation something. But the look passed so quickly that only someone specifically watching for it would have noticed. No problem, Webb replied. Doyle, if you need any help finding supplies or understanding our local procedures, just let me know. I know it can be overwhelming starting at a new base. The offer sounded genuine and helpful, exactly the kind of support that new personnel typically appreciated. But something in Webb's tone suggested an underlying assumption about Doyle's capabilities that echoed Rodriguez's dismissive attitude. Thank you, Doyle replied politely. I'll keep that in mind. Technical Sergeant Park had been observing the interaction while reviewing her paperwork. Now she stepped forward, her expression professional but alert. Rodriguez, I want to review the maintenance logs from the past week before the colonel arrives, she said. Specifically, I need to understand any irregularities or unusual situations that might come up during his inspection. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. Irregularities? Everything's been routine, Sergeant Park. Standard maintenance schedules, normal parts replacement, nothing unusual. Parker's gaze sharpened slightly. Nothing unusual? No missing components, no unexplained parts orders, no discrepancies in the inventory logs? The hangar fell quiet except for the constant hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of aircraft operations. Webb's friendly demeanor seemed to tighten almost imperceptibly, while Rodriguez looked genuinely confused by the line of questioning. I'm not aware of any discrepancies, Rodriguez said slowly. Webb handles most of the parts ordering and inventory tracking. You'd have to ask him about specific details. All eyes turned to Webb, who maintained his helpful expression, despite the sudden attention. I can pull all the relevant documentation if you need it, Sergeant Park. Everything's been properly logged and accounted for. I'd appreciate that, Park replied. In fact, why don't you gather all the parts orders and inventory logs from the past 6 months? The colonel might want to review them as part of his inspection. For the first time since the conversation began, Webb's composure showed a hairline crack. 6 months? That's a lot of paperwork to pull together in 15 minutes. Then you'd better get started, Park said firmly. Chief Williams had been watching this exchange with the practiced eye of someone who had seen plenty of administrative investigations over the years. Something about Webb's reaction to the paperwork request triggered his instincts in ways that had nothing to do with normal pre-inspection nervousness. "Webb," the chief said casually, "while you're pulling those records, make sure you include the serial numbers for any high-value components. Ammunition, targeting systems, communications equipment, anything that requires special handling or tracking." Webb nodded quickly. "Absolutely, Chief. I'll get right on that." As Webb hurried toward the administrative area of the hangar, Rodriguez turned back to Doyle with renewed focus on establishing his authority in front of the leadership present. "Doyle, since we're about to have a command inspection, I want you to demonstrate your understanding of safety protocols for ammunition handling," he said. "Walk me through the procedures for securing the GAU-8 system." "First step is to verify the aircraft's master arm switch is in the safe position," Doyle began, moving toward the appropriate control panel. "Second, confirm that all ammunition is properly seated in the feed system with no loose rounds. Third, engage the mechanical safety locks on both the ammunition drum and the feed mechanism." She moved through each step with practiced efficiency, her hands finding controls and safety devices without hesitation. "Fourth, document the ammunition count and verify it matches the load sheet. Fifth, secure the access panels and verify all tools are accounted for. Sixth, complete the safety checklist and obtain supervisory signature." Chief Williams found himself nodding along with each step. Not only was Doyle's knowledge correct, but her execution showed the kind of muscle memory that came from extensive repetition. "And what's the procedure if you discover a misfire or jam during this process?" Rodriguez pressed, clearly hoping to find a gap in her knowledge. "Immediate action is to implement the emergency shutdown procedure," Doyle replied without hesitation. "Secure the master arm, activate the manual safety locks, clear all personnel from the immediate area, and notify the aircraft commander and maintenance control. The system remains locked out until qualified explosive ordnance disposal personnel can evaluate the situation." Rodriguez's expression shifted from confidence to uncertainty. These weren't textbook answers. They demonstrated understanding of real-world procedures that typically took months of hands-on experience to master. Technical Sergeant Park had stopped reviewing her paperwork and was now watching Doyle with undisguised interest. "Doyle, that's an unusually comprehensive understanding of emergency procedures. Where did you receive that training?" The question carried weight that everyone in the hangar could feel. It was the kind of inquiry that preceded deeper investigation into someone's background and qualifications. Doyle met Park's gaze steadily. "Comprehensive training is essential when working with weapons systems, Sergeant. Lives depend on proper procedures." It was a non-answer that revealed nothing, while somehow suggesting everything. Chief Williams had heard similar responses from personnel who had experience they couldn't or wouldn't discuss in detail. The hangar's main door opened again, and this time it was clear that someone important had arrived. The sound of multiple footsteps and the unmistakable cadence of senior leadership moving with purpose echoed across the concrete floor. "Attention on deck!" someone called out, and every person in the hangar immediately stopped what they were doing and came to attention. Colonel James Morrison entered the hangar with the bearing of someone who had commanded respect for decades. At 53 years old, Morrison had built his reputation on operational excellence and attention to detail that bordered on legendary within the Air Force community. His inspection visits were known throughout the squadron for their thoroughness and their ability to uncover problems that others had missed. "As you were," the colonel said, and normal activity resumed throughout the hangar. "Chief Williams, I'm here for an unscheduled review of maintenance operations. I want to see your current work in progress and review recent operational reports." "Yes, sir," Williams replied. "We've got several aircraft in various stages of maintenance. Would you like to start with a specific system or area?" Colonel Morrison's gaze swept across the hangar, taking in the organized chaos of military maintenance operations. His eyes lingered for a moment on the group gathered around the A-10 where the earlier conversation had taken place. "Let's start with weapons systems," he said. "I want to understand your procedures for ammunition handling and safety protocols." The timing couldn't have been more significant. Rodriguez straightened his uniform and prepared to lead the discussion, while Doyle stepped back slightly to allow senior personnel to take the lead. "Sergeant Rodriguez," the colonel said, "walk me through your current ammunition inspection procedures." Rodriguez began explaining the standard protocols, covering the basics of safety procedures and documentation requirements. His explanation was competent and thorough, demonstrating solid knowledge of established procedures. As Rodriguez spoke, Colonel Morrison's attention was drawn to Doyle, who continued working quietly on the GAU-8 system. There was something about her movements, the way she handled the equipment, that suggested familiarity beyond what he would expect from someone at her rank and apparent experience level. "Airman," the colonel said, addressing Doyle directly, "what's your assessment of this particular weapons system?" The question came without warning and carried the weight of command authority. Every person in the immediate area turned to listen to her response. Doyle set down her tools and turned to face the colonel properly. "Sir, the GAU-8 system is currently within all operational tolerances. Barrel condition shows normal wear patterns consistent with recent training operations. Ammunition feed mechanism has been inspected and verified. All safety protocols have been implemented according to technical guidance." Colonel Morrison nodded slowly. "And how long have you been working on A-10 systems, Airman?" "This is my current assignment, sir," Doyle replied, carefully avoiding specifics about timeline or previous experience. The colonel's expression showed that he had caught the careful phrasing of her response. "I see. And your previous experience with weapons systems?" Before Doyle could answer, Rodriguez stepped forward. "Sir, Airman Doyle is relatively new to our maintenance section. We've been providing her with basic orientation and training on our specific procedures." Colonel Morrison's gaze shifted between Rodriguez and Doyle, clearly sensing that there was more to this situation than the surface conversation revealed. "Basic orientation," he repeated, "and yet she seems quite familiar with safety protocols and technical specifications." Chief Williams decided to contribute to the discussion. "Sir, Doyle has demonstrated solid knowledge of ammunition handling procedures. Her work has been thorough and professional." "I appreciate that assessment, Chief," the colonel replied. "However, I'm curious about the depth of that knowledge." He turned back to Doyle. "Airman, what would you do if you discovered a round that failed to feed properly during a combat operation?" The question was specific and technical, requiring understanding of procedures that weren't covered in basic training manuals. It was the kind of knowledge that came from operational experience or specialized training. Doyle considered her response carefully. "Sir, the immediate priority would be aircraft safety and mission continuation. I would implement the malfunction clearing procedure while maintaining positive control of the aircraft's weapons systems. If the malfunction couldn't be cleared using standard procedures, I would recommend returning to base for detailed inspection by qualified maintenance personnel." Colonel Morrison raised an eyebrow. "That's a very specific understanding of operational procedures, Airman. Most maintenance personnel wouldn't be familiar with in-flight malfunction protocols." The observation hung in the air like a challenge. Doyle had demonstrated knowledge that went beyond her apparent role and experience level, and the colonel had noticed. Technical Sergeant Park stepped forward. "Sir, if I may, I've been reviewing our maintenance documentation in preparation for your inspection. There are some inventory discrepancies that might warrant your attention." The colonel's focus shifted to Park. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Parts orders that don't align with scheduled maintenance requirements," Park replied. "Requests for components that exceed normal replacement cycles. Some unusual patterns in our ammunition inventory tracking." Rodriguez looked genuinely surprised by this information. "Sergeant Park, I wasn't aware of any inventory problems. Webb handles most of our parts ordering and tracking." "Yes," Park agreed, "which is why I've asked him to compile comprehensive records for your review." Colonel Morrison processed this information with the practiced attention of someone who had investigated similar situations before. "Where is Senior Airman Webb now?" Chief Williams looked around the hangar. "He was gathering paperwork for the inspection, sir. Should be in the administrative area." "Let's continue with the technical discussion while he completes that task," the colonel said. "I want to understand more about your maintenance procedures and the qualifications of your personnel." He turned back to Doyle. "Airman, describe the relationship between ammunition handling procedures and aircraft targeting systems." It was another technical question that probed deeper than basic maintenance knowledge. Doyle found herself in the position of having to answer without revealing more about her background than she was prepared to discuss. "Sir, Ammunition systems and targeting systems are integrated components that require coordination between multiple aircraft systems, she began. Proper ammunition handling ensures that targeting systems receive accurate data about available ordnance, which affects weapon selection and engagement parameters. Colonel Morrison listened carefully to her response. And how would you troubleshoot a situation where the targeting system indicates available ammunition, but the physical count doesn't match? The question revealed sophisticated understanding of complex system interactions. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that this was beyond his own technical knowledge. Doyle paused, knowing that her answer would reveal significant expertise. Sir, that discrepancy could indicate several potential issues: electronic system malfunction, physical ammunition counting errors, or unauthorized removal of ordnance. The troubleshooting procedure would involve systematic verification of both electronic and physical systems, starting with the most critical safety considerations. Unauthorized removal, the colonel repeated. That's an interesting possibility to consider. What procedures would you recommend for investigating that scenario? Before Doyle could respond, Senior Airman Webb returned from the administrative area, carrying a thick folder of paperwork. His approach interrupted the technical discussion, but his expression suggested that the paperwork compilation had not gone as smoothly as expected. Sir, Webb said, addressing Colonel Morrison, I've gathered the requested documentation, but there seem to be some filing discrepancies that might require additional research to resolve. Colonel Morrison turned his attention to Webb. What kind of discrepancies? Webb opened the folder and consulted several pages. Some parts orders that were processed but don't have corresponding installation records. A few ammunition count variations that might be data entry errors. Nothing that appears to be a serious problem, but the documentation isn't perfectly aligned. Technical Sergeant Park stepped closer to review the paperwork. Webb, these discrepancies you're describing, when did you first become aware of them? Just now, while I was pulling the records together, Webb replied. I mean, I've noticed small inconsistencies before, but I always assumed they were administrative errors that would get resolved through normal processes. Colonel Morrison exchanged a meaningful look with Chief Williams. In their combined decades of military experience, they had both seen situations where small inconsistencies and administrative errors were indicators of more significant problems. Webb, the colonel said, I want you to walk me through the specific process you use for ordering and tracking high-value components. Webb's friendly demeanor showed the first signs of strain. Sir, it's a standard process. Maintenance identifies a need, I research the appropriate part numbers, submit the orders through the supply system, and track delivery and installation. And who verifies the installation of these components? The colonel asked. The maintenance supervisor signs off on completed work, Webb replied. Usually Sergeant Rodriguez or whoever is designated as the work supervisor for that particular task. Rodriguez looked increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Sir, I sign off on work that I personally verify or that's completed by personnel under my direct supervision, but I don't personally track every component that gets installed. Colonel Morrison nodded. That's understandable for routine maintenance, but for high-value components, ammunition, targeting systems, communications equipment, there should be additional verification procedures. Absolutely, sir, Rodriguez agreed. Those items require special handling and documentation. And yet, Technical Sergeant Park interjected, consulting her notes. Our records show several instances where high-value components were ordered and received, but the installation documentation is incomplete or missing. The weight of this observation settled over the group like a heavy blanket. Missing documentation for high-value military components was a serious matter that could indicate theft, misappropriation, or security breaches. Webb's expression remained helpful and concerned, but careful observers might have noticed a slight tension in his posture. Sergeant Park, I'd be happy to help research any specific discrepancies you've identified. Sometimes documentation gets misfiled or overlooked during busy maintenance periods. Colonel Morrison's experience with personnel investigations made him sensitive to the dynamics of the conversation. Webb's responses were reasonable and cooperative, but they also seemed carefully crafted to deflect responsibility while appearing helpful. I appreciate your willingness to assist with this research, the colonel said. However, given the nature of these discrepancies, I think we need to implement a more systematic approach to understanding what's happened. He turned to Chief Williams. Chief, I want you to secure all maintenance documentation and parts inventory records. Nothing gets modified or removed until we complete a thorough review." "Yes, sir," Williams replied immediately. "Additionally," the colonel continued, "I want to interview each member of your maintenance team individually to understand their knowledge of parts, ordering, and installation procedures." The announcement transformed the atmosphere in the hangar from routine inspection to serious investigation. Everyone present understood that careers and potentially criminal charges could result from whatever the colonel discovered. During this administrative discussion, Doyle had continued working quietly on the GAU-8 system. Her focus on the technical task at hand seemed to provide a welcome contrast to the increasing tension surrounding the administrative investigation. Colonel Morrison noticed her continued work and approached the aircraft. "Airman Doyle, while we're addressing these administrative matters, I'm interested in your technical assessment of this weapon system." Doyle looked up from her work. "Sir, the system appears to be in excellent operational condition. All components function within specifications, and maintenance records indicate proper care and attention." "And you're confident in that assessment?" the colonel asked. "Yes, sir. The GAU-8 is a robust system when properly maintained. This particular aircraft shows evidence of careful maintenance and proper operational procedures." Colonel Morrison studied her for a moment. "You speak about this system with considerable familiarity. What's your background with A-10 aircraft?" The question brought the focus back to Doyle's qualifications and experience. Rodriguez, Chief Williams, Technical Sergeant Park, and Webb all turned their attention to her response. Doyle set down her tools and faced the colonel directly. "Sir, I have experience with various weapon systems and maintenance procedures. My current assignment is to support the maintenance operations of this squadron." It was another carefully worded response that provided factual information without revealing specifics. Colonel Morrison recognized the pattern. He had encountered similar responses from personnel who had classified or sensitive backgrounds that couldn't be discussed in open forums. "I understand," he said. "Chief Williams, I want to continue this technical discussion in a more appropriate setting. For now, let's focus on the administrative investigation." Chief Williams nodded. "Sir, should we continue normal maintenance operations while you conduct your review?" "Yes, but with additional oversight," the colonel replied. "I want all high-value component work to be supervised by multiple personnel, and I want complete documentation of every action taken." Technical Sergeant Park consulted her notes. "Sir, that will require some adjustment to our normal procedures, but we can implement those controls immediately." "Good," Colonel Morrison said. "Webb, I want you to accompany me to the administrative area so we can review these documentation discrepancies in detail." Webb's helpful expression remained in place, but there was a noticeable tightness around his eyes. "Of course, sir. I'll be happy to help clarify any questions about our procedures." As the colonel and Webb moved toward the administrative area, followed by Technical Sergeant Park with her folder of documentation, the remaining personnel in the hangar were left to process what had just occurred. Rodriguez looked genuinely confused and concerned. "Chief, do you think there's really a serious problem with our inventory system?" Williams considered the question carefully. "Rodriguez, in my experience, when senior leadership starts asking detailed questions about documentation and procedures, it's because they have reasons for concern that go beyond routine inspection." "But Webb has always been helpful and thorough with the paperwork," Rodriguez said. "I've never had any reason to question his work." "That may be true," Williams replied, "but sometimes people can appear to be doing good work while actually creating problems that aren't immediately visible." Doyle continued her work on the GAU-8 system, but she was clearly listening to the conversation. Her position gave her a unique perspective on the situation, though she wasn't yet prepared to reveal the full extent of her knowledge. "Chief," she said quietly, "if there are concerns about parts inventory and documentation, would it be helpful to conduct a physical verification of critical components?" Williams looked at her with interest. "What do you mean?" "A systematic inspection of serial numbers and component conditions compared to the official records," Doyle explained. "If there are discrepancies between what's documented and what's actually installed on the aircraft, a physical verification would identify those problems." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "That makes sense. If parts are missing or have been replaced with unauthorized components, a physical inspection would reveal it." Chief Williams considered the suggestion. "Doyle, that's a sophisticated approach to inventory verification. What's your experience with that kind of systematic inspection?" Another probing question about her background and qualifications. Doyle found herself in the position of having to balance helpfulness with operational security about her true role and experience. Chief, systematic verification is a standard approach to quality control in any complex system, she replied. When there are questions about documentation accuracy, physical verification provides definitive answers. It was a professionally appropriate response that avoided personal details while demonstrating understanding of investigative principles. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of raised voices from the administrative area where Colonel Morrison was conducting his review with Webb and Technical Sergeant Park. The specific words weren't clear, but the tone suggested that the document review was not proceeding smoothly. Rodriguez looked toward the administrative area with concern. "Chief, should we be doing something to help with whatever's going on over there?" Williams shook his head. "Rodriguez, when the colonel is conducting an investigation, the best thing we can do is continue our assigned tasks and be available if he needs additional information. But if there really is a problem with our inventory system, shouldn't we be trying to understand what went wrong?" Rodriguez asked. "We will," Williams replied. "But right now, our job is to let the investigation proceed without interference." Doyle had finished her immediate work on the GAU-8 system and was now reviewing her checklist to ensure all required tasks had been completed. Her methodical approach to documentation stood in stark contrast to the apparent documentation problems that had triggered the investigation. "Doyle," Chief Williams said, "since you've completed your work on that system, why don't you assist me with reviewing the maintenance logs for the other aircraft in the hangar?" The request provided an opportunity for Williams to observe more of Doyle's knowledge and capabilities, while contributing to the overall review that the colonel had requested. "Certainly, Chief," Doyle replied. "What specific information are you looking for?" "I want to verify that our documentation matches our actual maintenance activities," Williams explained. "Specifically, I want to check serial numbers, part numbers, and installation dates for any high-value components that have been replaced recently." Rodriguez joined the conversation. "Chief, I can help with that review. I've been involved in most of the major maintenance work over the past few months." "Good," Williams said. "Between the three of us, we should be able to create a comprehensive picture of our actual inventory versus our documented inventory." As they began reviewing maintenance logs and aircraft records, it became clear that the systematic approach Doyle had suggested was indeed revealing discrepancies. Several high-value components showed documentation that didn't align with the physical evidence on the aircraft. "Chief," Rodriguez said, consulting a maintenance log, "this record shows that we replaced a targeting computer module on aircraft number 8743, but when I look at the actual installation, the serial number doesn't match what's documented." Williams frowned. "When was that work completed?" Rodriguez checked the documentation. 3 weeks ago. And according to this, Webb was responsible for ordering the component and tracking its installation. Doyle looked up from her own review. "Chief, I'm seeing similar discrepancies on aircraft number 8751. The ammunition feed mechanism shows a replacement date and part number that don't correspond to the physical component currently installed." The pattern was becoming clear. Multiple aircraft showed documentation discrepancies involving high-value components, and Webb's name appeared consistently in the ordering and tracking records. Chief Williams set down his paperwork and looked toward the administrative area where the colonel's investigation was continuing. "Rodriguez, how well do you know Webb personally?" Rodriguez considered the question. "He's always seemed like a good airman, helpful, willing to take on extra duties, knowledgeable about the paperwork requirements. I've never had any concerns about his work or his reliability." "And he's been handling most of the parts ordering for how long?" Williams asked. "About 8 months, Rodriguez replied. "Since Technical Sergeant Morrison transferred to another base and we needed someone to take over those responsibilities." Doyle continued reviewing documentation while listening to the conversation. Her unique perspective on the situation allowed her to recognize patterns that the others were just beginning to understand. "Chief," she said carefully, "if someone were systematically removing high-value components and replacing them with documentation that covered their absence, what would be the most effective way to detect that activity?" Williams looked at her with sharp attention. "That's a very specific question, Doyle. What makes you think about that particular scenario?" "The pattern we're seeing," she replied. "Documentation that doesn't match physical reality, involving high-value components, with one person consistently involved in the ordering and tracking process. It suggests systematic activity rather than random errors. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable with the implications. You're suggesting that Webb might be deliberately stealing components? I'm suggesting that the evidence we're finding indicates systematic discrepancies that require explanation, Doyle said carefully. Whether that's theft, administrative errors, or some other cause would need to be determined through proper investigation. Chief Williams nodded slowly. Doyle, you seem to have a good understanding of investigative principles. What's your background with this type of analysis? Another probing question about her qualifications and experience. Doyle found herself walking a careful line between being helpful and revealing more about her true role than was appropriate. Chief, systematic analysis is important in any situation where you need to understand complex problems, she replied. Whether it's mechanical troubleshooting or administrative investigations, the same principles apply. Before Williams could pursue the question further, the sound of rapid footsteps approached from the administrative area. Technical Sergeant Park appeared, moving with the urgency of someone who had discovered significant problems. Chief Williams, she called out, the colonel needs to speak with all of you immediately. The tone of her voice made it clear that the investigation had uncovered serious issues that required immediate attention from everyone involved. Rodriguez straightened his uniform instinctively. Sergeant Park, what's the situation? The colonel will explain everything, Park replied. But I need all three of you to come to the administrative area right now. As they moved toward the administrative area, Doyle found herself considering how much of her actual knowledge and role she might need to reveal. The investigation appeared to be reaching a critical point, and her unique perspective might become essential to resolving the situation. Chief Williams walked alongside her, clearly still curious about her background and capabilities. Doyle, whatever we're about to learn, I want you to know that your analytical approach to this situation has been helpful and professional. Thank you, Chief, she replied. I hope we can help resolve whatever problems have been identified. Rodriguez looked nervous about the implications of the investigation. Do you think Webb is really involved in something serious? Rodriguez, Williams said, we're about to find out. The important thing is that we tell the truth about what we know and let the proper authorities handle the investigation. As they entered the administrative area, they could see Colonel Morrison seated at a desk with multiple folders spread out before him. Senior Airman Webb sat across from him, his friendly demeanor replaced by obvious stress and discomfort. The colonel looked up as they approached. Chief Williams, I need to discuss some serious discrepancies that we've discovered in your maintenance documentation and inventory records. The formal tone made it clear that this was no longer a routine inspection, but a full-scale investigation into potential criminal activity. Sir, Williams replied, we're ready to provide whatever information and assistance you need. Colonel Morrison gestured toward chairs that had been arranged in the administrative area. Please sit down. We have significant issues to address, and I need everyone's complete cooperation and honesty. As they took their seats, Webb avoided making eye contact with his colleagues. His posture and expression suggested someone who knew that serious consequences were about to unfold. Gentlemen, and Airman Doyle, the colonel began, our review of maintenance documentation has revealed systematic discrepancies involving high-value components worth tens of thousands of dollars. These discrepancies appear to involve unauthorized removal of parts, falsification of documentation, and potential theft of military property. The weight of these accusations settled over the group like a physical presence. Webb shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while Rodriguez looked genuinely shocked by the scope of the allegations. Sir, Rodriguez said, are you saying that components have actually been stolen from our aircraft? That appears to be the case, Colonel Morrison replied. Technical Sergeant Park has identified multiple instances where expensive components were allegedly replaced according to documentation, but the physical evidence shows that the original components were removed and not properly replaced. Chief Williams processed this information with the grim understanding of someone who had seen similar investigations before. Sir, what's the estimated value of the missing components? Preliminary estimates suggest over $100,000 in missing parts, the colonel replied, but that figure could increase as we complete our investigation. Rodriguez turned to look at Webb with disbelief. Webb, is this true? Have you been stealing parts from our aircraft? Webb finally looked up, his expression showing the strain of someone whose carefully constructed deception was collapsing. I can explain. It's not what it looks like. Colonel Morrison leaned forward, Senior Airman Webb, you have the right to remain silent and request legal representation before answering any questions about these allegations. The formal Miranda warning made it clear that the situation had moved beyond administrative investigation into potential criminal charges. Webb shook his head. Sir, I want to explain what happened, but it's complicated, and there are things about this situation that you need to understand. I'm listening, the colonel said. Webb took a deep breath before beginning his explanation. Sir, I have been involved in removing components from aircraft, but not for personal gain. I've been under pressure from someone who has been threatening my family. The claim of coercion and family threats introduced a new dimension to the investigation that caught everyone by surprise. Explain, Colonel Morrison said simply. 3 months ago, I received a phone call from someone who claimed to have detailed information about my financial situation and my family's activities, Webb continued. This person knew things about my personal life that they shouldn't have known, and they made it clear that they could cause serious problems for me and my family if I didn't cooperate with their requests. Rodriguez looked confused. What kind of requests? Webb's voice showed the strain of someone revealing a carefully guarded secret. They wanted me to remove specific components from aircraft and deliver them to designated locations. They provided detailed instructions about how to falsify the documentation to cover the missing parts. Chief Williams had seen coercion cases before, but the sophistication described by Webb suggested professional criminal organization rather than opportunistic theft. Who was making these threats? The colonel asked. I never met them in person, Webb replied. All contact was through phone calls and encrypted messages, but they demonstrated that they had access to personal information about my family that made their threats credible. Technical Sergeant Park consulted her notes. Webb, you're describing a sophisticated operation that would require detailed knowledge of military procedures and documentation systems. This wasn't random criminal activity. No, ma'am, Webb agreed. Whoever was behind this knew exactly how our systems work and how to exploit them. Colonel Morrison processed this information with the understanding of someone who had dealt with security investigations throughout his career. Webb, coercion might explain your actions, but it doesn't excuse them. You should have reported the threats through proper channels instead of participating in theft of military property. I know, sir, Webb replied, but they made it clear that involving military authorities would result in immediate retaliation against my family. I felt like I had no choice but to comply with their demands. Rodriguez shook his head in disbelief. Webb, why didn't you talk to me or Chief Williams about this? We could have helped you find a way to deal with the situation. Because they specifically warned me that involving anyone else would trigger the consequences they had threatened, Webb explained. I was terrified of making the situation worse. Doyle had been listening carefully to Webb's explanation, and something about his description triggered her analytical instincts. The level of sophistication and insider knowledge he described suggested that this case might be connected to the broader investigation she was conducting. Webb, she said quietly, did the people who contacted you ever mention anything about ongoing investigations or security concerns at this base? The question surprised everyone, including Colonel Morrison, who looked at Doyle with sharp attention. Webb considered her question carefully. They seemed to know a lot about our procedures and personnel, and they specifically instructed me to be alert for anyone who seemed to be asking unusual questions or showing interest in parts inventory and documentation. Colonel Morrison's expression showed immediate recognition of the significance of Webb's statement. Webb, you're describing counterintelligence activity. Someone was using you to steal components while also gathering information about potential investigations. Sir, Doyle said, that suggests this case might be connected to broader security concerns that go beyond simple theft. The colonel turned his full attention to Doyle. Airman, you seem to have unusual insight into the security implications of this situation. What's your background with counterintelligence investigations? The moment had arrived when Doyle would need to reveal at least part of her true role and purpose at the base. Doyle took a measured breath, recognizing that the investigation had reached a point where her true role could no longer remain hidden. The convergence of Webb's coercion story with the broader patterns she had been tracking made it clear that full disclosure was necessary. Sir, she said, addressing Colonel Morrison directly, I need to provide you with information that will require verification through secure channels before we continue this discussion. The formal tone of her statement immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Chief Williams, Rodriguez, and Technical Sergeant Park all turned their full attention to her, while Webb looked confused by the sudden shift in focus. Colonel Morrison studied Doyle's expression and bearing. "Continue, Airman." "Sir, my actual assignment to this maintenance section is part of an ongoing counterintelligence investigation into suspected theft and trafficking of military components," Doyle explained. "I'm operating undercover to identify the scope and methods of this criminal network." The revelation hit the room like a physical impact. Rodriguez's mouth actually fell open, while Chief Williams sat back in his chair with the expression of someone whose instincts had been correct, but who was still surprised by the confirmation. "You're telling me you're an investigator?" Rodriguez asked, his voice showing a mixture of disbelief and embarrassment about his earlier treatment of her. "That's correct," Doyle replied. "My apparent rank and assignment are cover for my actual role in this operation." Colonel Morrison maintained his professional composure, but his eyes showed the sharp attention of someone processing significant new information. "Doyle, or whatever your actual name is, I'm going to need immediate verification of your credentials and authorization for this operation." "Understood, sir," Doyle responded. "Technical Sergeant Park has the necessary contact information to verify my status through proper channels." All eyes turned to Park, who had been quietly observing the conversation. For the first time since the investigation began, she showed a slight smile. "Sir," Park said, "I can confirm that Airman Doyle is operating under the authority of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. I've been serving as her local handler and support contact." Chief Williams shook his head slowly. "So, when I thought my instincts were telling me something was different about Doyle's background and capabilities—" "Your instincts were correct, Chief," Park replied, "but we needed to maintain operational security until the investigation reached a point where disclosure was necessary." Rodriguez looked between Doyle and Park with obvious confusion. "How long has this been going on? How long have I been working alongside an undercover investigator without knowing it?" "About 6 weeks," Doyle answered. "Long enough to establish a baseline understanding of normal operations and identify the irregularities that Webb has described." Webb had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. "Wait, you're saying that you've been investigating the parts theft that I was being forced to participate in?" "Among other things," Doyle confirmed, "your situation appears to be part of a larger pattern of criminal activity that we've been tracking." Colonel Morrison stood up and began pacing behind his desk, clearly processing the implications of multiple ongoing investigations converging in his maintenance hangar. "Let me understand this correctly," he said. "We have an undercover investigation into parts theft, we have a systematic theft operation being conducted under coercion, and we have evidence of a criminal network with detailed knowledge of our procedures and personnel." "That's an accurate summary, sir," Park confirmed. "And now we need to determine how these elements connect and what our next steps should be," the colonel continued. Rodriguez was still struggling with the revelation about Doyle's true identity. "I can't believe I've been treating an investigator like a trainee for weeks. I feel like a complete fool." "Rodriguez," Doyle said, "your reaction was exactly what we needed to maintain my cover. If you had treated me differently, it would have raised questions that could have compromised the investigation." "But I was dismissive and condescending," Rodriguez protested. "I questioned your knowledge and capabilities." "Which helped establish my cover as someone who appeared to lack experience," Doyle replied. "Your behavior, while unprofessional, actually contributed to the success of the operation." Chief Williams had been processing the implications of the situation. "So, when you demonstrated knowledge of weapon systems and procedures that seem beyond your apparent experience level, you were actually drawing on your real background." "Correct," Doyle confirmed. "Maintaining the balance between appearing competent enough to do the job while not revealing the full extent of my knowledge was one of the challenges of this assignment." Webb looked increasingly distressed as he understood the implications. "Does this mean that everything I've told you about the coercion and threats might be evidence in a larger investigation?" "Webb," Colonel Morrison said, "your cooperation in this investigation could be crucial to understanding the full scope of the criminal network, but you need to understand that your participation in theft, regardless of the circumstances, has serious legal consequences." "I understand that, sir," Webb replied, "but I want to help stop whoever is behind this. They made my life a nightmare for months, and they're obviously hurting the military and national security." Technical Sergeant Park consulted her notes. Webb, the information you've provided about the threats and coercion tactics will be valuable intelligence, but we need you to provide every detail you can remember about your contacts with this network. I kept records, Webb said quietly. Not official records, but personal notes about the phone calls, the instructions, and the locations where I was told to deliver components. I was terrified that something would happen to my family, and I wanted to have some kind of evidence if things went wrong. Colonel Morrison stopped pacing and looked directly at Webb. Where are these records? Hidden in my dormitory room, Webb replied. I knew it was risky to keep them, but I also knew that they might be the only way to prove what really happened if I ever got caught. We'll need to secure those records immediately, the colonel said. Park, coordinate with security forces to retrieve Webb's documentation while maintaining the integrity of the evidence. Yes, sir, Park replied. Rodriguez had been quietly processing everything he had learned. Sir, I have to ask about my own situation. I've been supervising work that I now know involved stolen components. Am I facing disciplinary action? Colonel Morrison considered the question carefully. Rodriguez, based on what we've learned today, it appears that you were unaware of the theft and were manipulated as part of the deception. However, there will need to be a formal review of your supervisory responsibilities and any potential negligence and oversight. I understand, sir, Rodriguez said. I just want to know what I can do to help fix this situation. Your cooperation with the investigation will be noted, the colonel replied, but your future in the Air Force will depend on the findings of the formal review process. Doyle had been listening to these administrative discussions while considering the broader implications of what they had learned. Webb's description of the criminal network's sophistication suggested connections that went beyond their current investigation. Sir, she said, based on what Webb has described, this network appears to have access to detailed intelligence about our personnel, procedures, and investigation capabilities. That suggests either insider access or sophisticated surveillance that we need to address. Colonel Morrison nodded. Agreed, which raises questions about how much additional compromise we might be dealing with. Exactly, Doyle continued. Webb's handlers knew enough to instruct him to watch for people asking unusual questions about inventory and documentation. That suggests they were aware that an investigation was likely or already underway. Chief Williams looked concerned. Are you saying that our operational security might have been compromised from the beginning? It's a possibility we need to consider, Doyle replied. Professional criminal networks often have methods for detecting law enforcement activity, and this organization seems to have demonstrated that capability. Technical Sergeant Park was taking notes throughout this discussion, which means we need to assume that our current conversation and investigation activities might also be known to the network. The implications of potential ongoing surveillance cast a shadow over their planning. If the criminal network had advanced knowledge of investigation activities, traditional approaches might be ineffective or dangerous. Webb, Colonel Morrison said, when was your last contact with these people? Webb considered the question. 2 days ago, they called to confirm that I would be ready to remove additional components this week. Did they specify what components or when? The colonel asked. Targeting computer modules from 2 different aircraft, Webb replied. They wanted them removed and delivered by tomorrow night. Colonel Morrison exchanged looks with Park and Doyle. That timeline suggests they're planning to accelerate their operation, possibly because they suspect increased scrutiny, or because they have a specific deadline for delivering stolen components to their customers, Doyle added. Rodriguez looked confused. Customers? You think there are people buying stolen military components? Rodriguez, Chief Williams explained. High-value military components have significant resale value on black markets, especially to foreign entities interested in reverse engineering our technology. The national security implications of the theft became clearer as they discussed the potential end users of stolen military technology. Sir, Doyle said, given the timeline Webb described and the possibility of ongoing surveillance, we need to make some immediate decisions about how to proceed. Colonel Morrison nodded. What are you recommending? We have an opportunity to use Webb's scheduled contact with the network to gather additional intelligence, Doyle explained. But it would require careful coordination and significant risk management. Webb looked alarmed. You want me to continue pretending to cooperate with them? Only if you're willing and only with extensive support and protection, Doyle clarified. The intelligence value could be substantial, but your safety and the safety of your family would be our primary concern. Technical Sergeant Park consulted her notes. A controlled operation like that would require approval and support from higher headquarters. It's not something we could implement at the squadron level. Agreed, Colonel Morrison said, but it's worth considering as part of our overall response strategy. Rodriguez had been listening to the discussion of operational planning with obvious discomfort. I have to say, this is way beyond anything I expected to be involved in when I came to work this morning. Rodriguez, the colonel said, you're involved whether you expected it or not. The question is whether you're going to help us resolve this situation professionally. Absolutely, sir, Rodriguez replied. I just need to understand what's expected of me. For now, maintain normal operations while being alert for anything unusual, the colonel instructed. Don't discuss this investigation with anyone outside this room, and report immediately if you notice any changes in personnel behavior or operational procedures. Chief Williams raised his hand. Sir, what about the rest of the maintenance personnel? Some of them might have noticed irregularities or unusual activities that could be relevant to the investigation. We'll need to interview them systematically, Colonel Morrison replied, but we'll do it in a way that doesn't compromise operational security or alert potential additional participants in the network. Doyle considered the personnel security aspects of the situation. Sir, based on the sophistication of this network, we should consider the possibility that Webb wasn't their only contact within the maintenance organization. The suggestion that there might be additional compromised personnel added another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. Webb looked distressed by the implication. I never had contact with anyone else on base who I knew was involved, but they did ask questions about other personnel and their access to different types of components. What kind of questions? Park asked. They wanted to know who had access to communications equipment, who worked on electronic systems, who handled classified components, Webb explained. I thought they were just trying to understand our organizational structure. Colonel Morrison's expression showed the concern of someone who recognized the intelligence-gathering implications of these questions. Webb, those questions suggest they were conducting reconnaissance for potential expansion of their operation, he said. They were identifying additional targets for recruitment or coercion. Rodriguez looked around the room nervously. Sir, does that mean other people in our section might be under threat or pressure? It's possible, the colonel replied, which is why we need to move quickly and comprehensively to identify the full scope of this network's activities. The sound of approaching footsteps in the hangar interrupted their discussion. Through the administrative area windows, they could see several security forces personnel entering the facility. Sir, Park said, that should be the team I requested to secure Webb's personal records and begin the evidence collection process. Colonel Morrison stood up. Good. Let's coordinate with them to ensure we handle this investigation properly. As the security forces team approached the administrative area, Webb showed obvious nervousness about the escalation of official attention to his situation. Sir, he said to the colonel, what should I expect to happen next? Webb, you're going to be interviewed extensively about your contacts with this criminal network, Colonel Morrison explained. You'll also need to cooperate with the recovery of your personal records and any other evidence related to the theft operation. Will I be arrested? Webb asked. That depends on several factors, including the extent of your cooperation and the decisions made by the legal authorities, the colonel replied. But you need to understand that theft of military property carries serious criminal penalties. Technical Sergeant Park approached the windows to coordinate with the security forces team. After a brief conversation, she returned to the group. Sir, they're ready to begin evidence collection and formal interviews, she reported. They're requesting that we maintain the current personnel grouping while they establish their investigation protocols. Colonel Morrison nodded. Understood. Webb, you'll be the first priority for formal interview. Everyone else will be interviewed systematically to establish a complete record of the situation. Rodriguez raised his hand hesitantly. Sir, should I be concerned about my own legal situation? Rodriguez, at this point you appear to be a witness rather than a suspect, the colonel replied. But you should answer all questions completely and honestly during your interview. What about me? Doyle asked. My status in this investigation is somewhat complicated. Doyle, or whatever your actual name is, you'll need to coordinate with your OSI handlers about how to manage your formal testimony while maintaining operational security for any ongoing investigations, the colonel said. As the security forces team began establishing their evidence collection procedures, the maintenance hangar took on the atmosphere of a major criminal investigation. Normal aircraft maintenance operations had ceased, and the focus had shifted entirely to understanding and documenting the theft operation. Chief Williams observed the transformation with the perspective of someone who had seen the military justice system in action before. In 30 years of service, I've seen a lot of investigations, but this situation seems particularly complex. Chief, Doyle said, complex investigations often reveal connections and implications that weren't initially apparent. This case might be part of something much larger than what we've discovered so far. Rodriguez was watching the security forces personnel with obvious anxiety. Do you think my career is over? Rodriguez, Colonel Morrison said, your career will depend on the investigation findings and your demonstrated commitment to professional standards going forward. The fact that you were deceived doesn't automatically end your military service, but it will affect your future opportunities. Webb had been sitting quietly while the investigation infrastructure developed around him. Now he looked up with an expression of resignation mixed with determination. Sir, he said to Colonel Morrison, I want to do whatever I can to help catch the people who put me in this position. They threatened my family and forced me to betray my oath and my country. If there's a way for me to help stop them, I want to do it. The colonel studied Webb's expression carefully. Webb, your willingness to cooperate is noted and appreciated, but you need to understand that helping with this investigation doesn't eliminate the consequences of your actions. I understand that, sir, Webb replied, but if I can help prevent other people from going through what I've experienced, and if I can help protect military technology from being stolen and sold, then I want to contribute to that effort. Technical Sergeant Park had been coordinating with the security forces team and now returned with updated information about the investigation procedures. Sir, she said, they're requesting that we maintain current personnel security while they establish formal interview protocols. They also want to expand the investigation to include a comprehensive audit of all maintenance documentation and inventory records. How long will that process take? Colonel Morrison asked. Initial estimates suggest 3 to 5 days for the documentation review, depending on what they discover, Park replied. The personnel interviews could be completed within 24 hours. Chief Williams considered the operational implications. Sir, that means our normal maintenance operations will be significantly disrupted while this investigation proceeds. That's unavoidable, Chief, the colonel replied. The integrity of this investigation takes priority over operational convenience. Rodriguez looked concerned about the broader implications. Sir, what happens to the aircraft that are currently in maintenance status? Some of them are scheduled for operational missions this week. Those missions will be delayed or reassigned to other aircraft, Colonel Morrison said. We cannot risk using aircraft that might have compromised components or incomplete maintenance. The scope of the investigation's impact on squadron operations was becoming clear. Beyond the criminal justice aspects, the theft operation had created operational and readiness problems that would require weeks or months to fully resolve. Doyle had been considering the intelligence aspects of the situation. Sir, given the timeline that Webb described for his next contact with the criminal network, we have a narrow window to decide whether to attempt a controlled operation. Colonel Morrison looked at his watch. How much time do we have? Based on what Webb said, they expect the next component delivery tomorrow night, Doyle replied. That gives us approximately 30 hours to coordinate any operational response. Is that enough time to get approval and support for a controlled operation? The colonel asked. Technical Sergeant Park consulted her secure communication device. Sir, I can request expedited review and approval, but controlled operations involving undercover personnel and criminal networks require extensive coordination and risk assessment. Webb looked between Doyle and the colonel. If you do decide to try some kind of operation using my contact with them, what would that involve? Webb, Doyle explained, it would involve you maintaining contact with the network while wearing recording equipment and possibly leading them to a controlled location where they could be apprehended. That sounds extremely dangerous, Rodriguez observed. It would be, Doyle confirmed, which is why it would require extensive planning, backup support, and risk mitigation measures. Webb considered the proposal carefully. What would happen to my family during something like that? The threats against them were the reason I got involved in this situation in the first place. Your family would be placed in protective custody until the network could be neutralized, Colonel Morrison explained. Their safety would be our primary concern throughout any operation. The discussion of operational planning was interrupted by the approach of a security forces investigator who requested to speak with Colonel Morrison privately. "Sir," the investigator said, "we've discovered some additional information that affects the scope of this investigation." Colonel Morrison stepped away for a brief private conversation, leaving the others to wait and wonder what new developments had emerged. When he returned, his expression showed the gravity of someone who had received significant new information. "The investigation has expanded," he announced. "Intelligence analysis suggests that this theft operation is connected to a broader network that has been targeting multiple military installations across the country. The revelation that their local investigation was part of a much larger criminal enterprise changed everyone's understanding of the situation's importance." "Sir," Chief Williams said, "are you saying that what happened here has been happening at other bases?" "According to preliminary intelligence, yes," the colonel confirmed. "The methods and targets match patterns that have been observed at installations in 3 different states." Rodriguez looked shocked. How is that possible? How could a criminal network operate across multiple military bases without being detected? Professional criminal organizations often have the resources and expertise to conduct sophisticated operations, Doyle explained. They identify vulnerable targets, develop recruitment and coercion strategies, and implement systematic theft operations that are designed to avoid detection. Webb appeared overwhelmed by the scope of what he had been involved in. "I had no idea that I was part of something so large. I thought it was just local criminals who had targeted me personally." "Webb," Technical Sergeant Park said, "that's exactly how these networks operate. They compartmentalize their operations so that individual participants don't understand the full scope of the criminal enterprise." Colonel Morrison consulted his notes from the private conversation with the investigator. "This new intelligence affects our decision-making about potential operational responses. A controlled operation involving Webb might provide intelligence that could help disrupt the entire network. But it also increases the risk," Doyle pointed out. "If this is a sophisticated multi-state operation, they're likely to have extensive counter-surveillance capabilities and response procedures. The competing considerations of intelligence value versus operational risk created a complex decision-making environment for the investigation leadership." "Sir," Chief Williams said, "what's the timeline for making a decision about whether to proceed with a controlled operation?" "We need to decide within the next 6 hours," Colonel Morrison replied. "After that, the operational window will be too narrow to implement adequate safety measures." Technical Sergeant Park was taking notes throughout the discussion. "Sir, I need to coordinate with OSI headquarters to get input on the operational decision. They'll want to assess the intelligence value against the risk factors." "Do that immediately," the colonel instructed, "and make sure they understand that we have a narrow decision window." Rodriguez had been listening to the operational planning with obvious concern about his own situation. "Sir, what's my role in all of this? Am I expected to participate in operational activities?" "Rodriguez, your role is to continue cooperating with the investigation and maintaining normal operations as much as possible," Colonel Morrison replied. "You won't be involved in any operational activities." Webb looked around the room at the people who had become central figures in his life over the past few hours. "I keep thinking about how different things might have been if I had reported the initial threats instead of trying to handle the situation myself." "Webb," Doyle said, "hindsight analysis isn't helpful right now. What matters is how you handle the situation going forward." "I know," Webb replied, "but I can't help thinking about all the ways this could have been prevented." Chief Williams had seen personnel struggle with similar regrets during previous investigations. "Webb, the people who put you in this position are professionals at identifying and exploiting vulnerabilities. You weren't the first person they've targeted, and unfortunately, you probably won't be the last." The conversation was interrupted by Technical Sergeant Park's return from her secure communication session. "Sir," she reported, "OSI headquarters is very interested in the intelligence potential of a controlled operation. They're prepared to provide extensive support if we decide to proceed." "What kind of support?" Colonel Morrison asked. "Specialized surveillance equipment, backup personnel, coordination with other agencies, and protective services for Webb's family," Park explained. Webb looked relieved by the mention of protection for his family. "That's been my biggest concern throughout this entire situation." "As it should be," the colonel agreed. "Webb, if we proceed with an operation, your family's safety will be our absolute priority." Doyle had been considering the operational details. Sir, if we do proceed, we'll need to carefully script Webb's interactions with the network to maximize intelligence gathering while minimizing risk exposure. What would that involve? Rodriguez asked. Webb would need to maintain his normal communication patterns while gathering specific information about the network's structure, methods, and other targets, Doyle explained. He would also need to lead them to a controlled location where they could be safely apprehended. Webb nodded slowly. I think I can do that. I've been so afraid of these people for months that I've memorized every detail of our interactions. That detailed knowledge will be valuable, Colonel Morrison said, but you need to understand that any operational activity carries significant personal risk. I understand, sir, Webb replied, but I also understand that this network is hurting people and threatening national security. If I can help stop them, I want to do it. Technical Sergeant Park consulted her secure device again. Sir, OSI is requesting a decision within the next 2 hours. They need time to position resources and coordinate with other agencies. Colonel Morrison looked around the room at the people who had become central to this investigation. Given the intelligence value and the potential to disrupt a multi-state criminal network, I'm inclined to authorize the controlled operation. Sir, Chief Williams said, what are the primary risk factors we need to consider? Webb's personal safety, the possibility of network counter-surveillance, the potential for operational compromise, and the risk that the network might retaliate against other targets, the colonel enumerated. Doyle nodded. All of those risks can be mitigated with proper planning and support, but they can't be eliminated entirely. Rodriguez looked concerned about the decision-making process. Sir, what happens if something goes wrong during the operation? Rodriguez, that's why we have extensive planning and backup procedures, Colonel Morrison replied. But you're right that operational activities always carry risks that can't be completely controlled. Webb had been quietly considering the implications of participating in an operational response. Sir, if I agree to do this, what happens to me afterward? I mean, legally and professionally. Webb, your cooperation with this operation will be significant evidence of your willingness to make amends for your previous actions, the colonel explained. But it won't eliminate the legal consequences of the theft you participated in. I understand that, sir, Webb said. I just want to know what to expect. Technical Sergeant Park had been coordinating operational planning through her secure communications. Sir, if we proceed, OSI wants to brief Webb extensively on operational procedures and safety protocols. They also want to conduct detailed reconnaissance of the planned meeting location. How long will that preparation take? Colonel Morrison asked. Approximately 4 hours, Park replied, which would still leave adequate time for final coordination and positioning of support personnel. The timeline was tight, but manageable if they committed to proceeding with the operation. Sir, Doyle said, there's one additional factor we should consider. If this network has been operating successfully across multiple installations, they've demonstrated sophisticated operational security. They might be prepared for the possibility of law enforcement response. Colonel Morrison nodded, which increases both the risk and the importance of disrupting their operations. Rodriguez had been following the operational planning discussion with obvious anxiety. This whole situation has escalated so far beyond anything I could have imagined when we started the day with a routine inspection. Rodriguez, Chief Williams said, that's often how significant investigations develop. What seems like a small irregularity turns out to be connected to much larger problems. Webb looked around the room with an expression of determination mixed with apprehension. Sir, I've made my decision. I want to participate in the operation to help catch these people. Colonel Morrison studied Webb's expression carefully. Webb, are you certain about this decision? Once we begin operational activities, there won't be opportunities to change your mind. I'm certain, sir, Webb replied. These people have controlled my life and threatened my family for months. If there's a chance to stop them and help protect other people from going through what I've experienced, I want to take it. Understood, the colonel said. Park, initiate the operational planning process with OSI. I want comprehensive briefings, detailed risk assessments, and extensive backup procedures. Yes, sir, Park replied, immediately returning to her secure communication equipment. As the investigation transitioned from evidence gathering to operational planning, the atmosphere in the administrative area became more focused and urgent. The discovery that their local theft case was connected to a multi-state criminal network had transformed what began as a routine inspection into a significant counterintelligence operation. Chief Williams observed the transformation with the perspective of someone who had seen similar escalations before. "Sir, it's remarkable how quickly situations can develop from routine concerns to major operations." "Chief, that's the nature of criminal investigations," Colonel Morrison replied. "You never know where the evidence will lead or what connections you'll discover." Doyle had been considering the broader implications of the network they were preparing to target. "Sir, if this operation is successful, it could provide intelligence that helps protect multiple military installations and prevent significant technology theft." "Exactly," the colonel agreed, "which is why we need to ensure that we conduct this operation professionally and successfully." Rodriguez looked at the people around him with new appreciation for the complexity of their roles and responsibilities. "I have to say, this experience has given me a completely different understanding of the security challenges we face in the military." "Rodriguez," Webb said, "I hope it's also given you appreciation for the importance of reporting problems through proper channels instead of trying to handle them individually." "Definitely," Rodriguez agreed. "If I ever encounter anything like this in the future, I'll know to involve leadership and security personnel immediately." Technical Sergeant Park returned from her communication session with updates on the operational planning. "Sir," she reported, "OSI has approved the operation and is positioning resources to support it. They want to begin the detailed briefing process with Webb within the next hour." "Excellent," Colonel Morrison said. "What about protective measures for Webb's family?" "Already in progress," Park replied. "They'll be relocated to a secure location before Webb makes contact with the network." Webb looked relieved by the confirmation that his family would be protected. "Thank you, sir. That was my primary concern about participating in this operation." "As it should be," the colonel said. "We're not asking you to put your family at risk to help with this investigation." Doyle had been reviewing the operational timeline. "Sir, if we're proceeding with the operation tomorrow night, we need to ensure that all participants understand their roles and responsibilities clearly." "Agreed," Colonel Morrison said. "Park, I want detailed briefings for everyone who will be involved in supporting this operation." "Sir," Chief Williams said, "what's the role of the maintenance section during the operation? Do we maintain normal activities or implement special procedures?" "You'll maintain normal activities to avoid alerting the network to any changes in our operational patterns," the colonel replied. "But you'll also be prepared to support the investigation as needed." Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sir, what should I tell other personnel in the maintenance section if they ask questions about today's activities?" "Tell them that we conducted a comprehensive inspection and discovered some documentation discrepancies that require follow-up," Colonel Morrison instructed. "Don't discuss the details of the investigation or the operational planning." As the afternoon progressed, the investigation and operational planning activities continued with increasing intensity. The transformation of a routine maintenance inspection into a multi-agency counterintelligence operation demonstrated the complex security challenges faced by military installations. Webb spent several hours with OSI personnel, receiving detailed briefings on operational procedures, communication protocols, and safety measures. His willingness to cooperate fully with the operation impressed the professional investigators who had seen many similar cases. "Webb," the lead OSI agent said during one of the briefing sessions, "your detailed knowledge of the network's procedures and personnel will be invaluable in this operation. But remember that your safety is our primary concern throughout the process." "I understand," Webb replied, "but I also understand that this might be the only opportunity to catch these people and prevent them from threatening other families." The operational planning continued through the evening, with extensive coordination between multiple agencies and detailed preparation of equipment and personnel. The complexity of the operation reflected both the sophistication of the criminal network and the importance of disrupting their activities. As the sun set over Davis-Monthan Air Base, the maintenance hangar that had begun the day as a routine work environment had become the center of a significant law enforcement operation. The investigation that started with simple documentation discrepancies had revealed connections to a multi-state criminal network threatening national security. Colonel Morrison gathered the core investigation team for a final briefing before the operational phase began. Tomorrow night, we'll have the opportunity to significantly disrupt a criminal network that has been stealing military technology and threatening service members across multiple installations, he said. The success of this operation depends on professional execution, careful attention to safety protocols, and complete commitment to the mission. Webb looked around the room at the people who would become his partners in this complex investigation. Sir, I want everyone to know how much I appreciate the opportunity to help make this right. I know that my actions caused this problem, but I'm grateful for the chance to be part of the solution. Webb, Doyle said, your willingness to cooperate and take personal risks to help catch these criminals demonstrates character that will serve you well in whatever happens next. Technical Sergeant Park consulted her operational timeline. Sir, if we're maintaining the scheduled contact with the network, Webb needs to be in position by 1800 hours tomorrow. Understood, Colonel Morrison said. All supporting personnel will be positioned by 1600 hours, with final communication checks completed by 1730 hours. Chief Williams looked around the room with the expression of someone who understood the historical significance of what they were attempting. In my 30 years of military service, I've never been involved in anything quite like this operation. Chief, Rodriguez said, neither have I, but I'm proud to be part of an effort to protect our technology and our people from criminals who threaten national security. As the briefing concluded and personnel began preparing for the next day's operation, the investigation had evolved from a simple maintenance inspection into a complex counterintelligence operation with implications for military security across multiple states. The next evening arrived with clear skies and moderate temperatures that provided ideal conditions for the planned operation. Webb had spent the day in final preparation sessions, reviewing communication protocols and operational procedures with OSI personnel. At 1700 hours, Webb placed the scheduled call to his network contact, following the script that had been carefully developed to maximize intelligence gathering while maintaining his cover. This is Webb, he said when the call connected. I have the components ready for pickup as scheduled. The voice on the other end was electronically distorted, as it had been in all previous communications. Excellent. Proceed to the designated location at 2000 hours. Come alone and follow the established security procedures. Understood, Webb replied. Same pickup procedures as before? Correct. And Webb, remain alert for any unusual activity or personnel in the area. We've received information suggesting increased security attention at military installations recently. The comment confirmed the network's awareness of law enforcement activity, validating the investigators' concerns about operational security. I'll be careful, Webb said. Should I be concerned about anything specific? Just maintain normal security procedures and report anything unusual, the contact replied before ending the call. Webb immediately reported the conversation to the OSI operational team, which was monitoring all communications from a command post established near the designated meeting location. The comment about increased security attention confirms that they're aware of investigation activity, the lead OSI agent observed. But they're still proceeding with the planned meeting, which suggests confidence in their operational security. Colonel Morrison, who was observing the operation from the command post, consulted the operational timeline. All support personnel are in position, and Webb's family has been relocated to a secure location. We're ready to proceed. At 1930 hours, Webb departed for the meeting location, wearing concealed recording equipment and maintaining radio contact with the support team. The meeting location was an abandoned warehouse complex on the outskirts of Tucson, chosen by the criminal network for its isolation and multiple escape routes. Command, this is Webb, he reported as he approached the meeting location. I'm 5 minutes from the designated area. No unusual activity observed during the drive. Copy, Webb, the operational commander replied. All support teams are in position. Proceed according to plan. Webb parked his vehicle in the designated location and gathered the stolen components that would serve as evidence in the operation. The targeting computer modules represented thousands of dollars in military technology and significant intelligence value to foreign entities interested in reverse engineering American systems. At exactly 2000 hours, a van approached the meeting location. 2 individuals exited the vehicle, both wearing casual clothing and baseball caps that obscured their faces from potential surveillance. Webb, one of them called out. You have the materials? Right here, Webb replied, indicating the military-grade cases containing the stolen components. As the exchange proceeded, OSI surveillance teams documented the entire transaction, recording the participants' faces, vehicle information, and communication patterns. The intelligence gathered during these few minutes would provide crucial evidence for prosecution and investigation of the broader network. "These are exactly what we need," one of the criminals said after inspecting the stolen components. "Your work has been very valuable to our operation." "What happens next?" Webb asked, following the script designed to gather additional intelligence. "We'll contact you within the week with requirements for additional materials," the criminal replied. "The demand for these components continues to be strong from our customers." The reference to customers confirmed the investigators' assessment that the stolen military technology was being sold to foreign entities, elevating the case from simple theft to potential espionage and technology transfer violations. "Webb," the second criminal said, "we've been impressed with your reliability and discretion. We're considering expanding your role in our operation to include other types of components and possibly other locations." "What would that involve?" Webb asked. "We'll discuss the details during our next communication," the first criminal replied. "But it would mean significantly increased compensation and responsibility within our organization." The conversation provided valuable intelligence about the network's expansion plans and organizational structure. OSI personnel monitoring the operation were documenting every detail for analysis and follow-up investigation. As the criminals prepared to depart with the stolen components, OSI arrest teams positioned themselves for coordinated apprehension. The timing had to be precise to ensure the safety of all personnel while gathering maximum evidence. "Command, this is Team Leader," the arrest team commander reported. "All teams are ready for coordinated action." "Execute," came the immediate reply. Within seconds, multiple law enforcement vehicles surrounded the meeting location, and heavily armed agents moved to apprehend the criminals before they could escape or destroy evidence. "Federal agents, stop and place your hands where we can see them," the team leader shouted. The two criminals initially appeared to consider resistance, but the overwhelming law enforcement presence and strategic positioning of the arrest teams made escape impossible. "Don't move! Keep your hands visible!" Agents continued to shout as they approached the suspects. Both criminals complied with the arrest commands, allowing agents to take them into custody without violence or resistance. The stolen military components were immediately secured as evidence, along with the criminals' vehicle and personal effects. Webb remained in the designated safe area throughout the arrest operation, as planned. His role in the operation was complete, and his safety was protected by the extensive law enforcement presence. "Command, this is Team Leader," the arrest commander reported. "Both suspects are in custody, evidence is secured, and all personnel are safe." "Excellent work," came the reply from the command post. "Initiate evidence processing and suspect interview procedures." The successful conclusion of the operational phase marked a significant victory in the investigation, but it also represented the beginning of extensive follow-up activities to understand the full scope of the criminal network. Over the following days, analysis of evidence gathered during the operation revealed connections to criminal activities at military installations in California, Texas, and Florida. The two arrested individuals provided additional intelligence about the network's structure and methods in exchange for cooperation agreements with federal prosecutors. Webb's cooperation with the investigation resulted in reduced charges and a plea agreement that acknowledged his coercion while holding him accountable for his participation in the theft. His detailed knowledge of the network's procedures proved invaluable in identifying and prosecuting other participants. Rodriguez received a formal letter of reprimand for supervisory deficiencies, but was allowed to continue his military service with additional training and oversight requirements. His cooperation with the investigation and genuine ignorance of the criminal activity prevented more serious disciplinary action. Chief Williams was commended for his professional handling of the investigation and his recognition of irregularities that might have been overlooked by less experienced personnel. His 30 years of military service had prepared him well for the complex challenges revealed by the case. Technical Sergeant Park received recognition for her role in coordinating the investigation while maintaining operational security. Her ability to balance her overt responsibilities with her covert support for the undercover operation demonstrated exceptional professional skill. Colonel Morrison was praised by higher headquarters for his decisive leadership during the investigation and his willingness to support the operational response that disrupted the criminal network. His command's cooperation with federal investigators became a model for similar cases at other installations. 3 weeks after the operation, Doyle stood in the same maintenance hangar where the investigation had begun, but now wearing her actual rank insignia as technical sergeant and displaying the commendation she had received for her undercover work. Rodriguez approached her with obvious embarrassment about his earlier treatment of her. "Sergeant, I owe you a significant apology for the way I treated you during your undercover assignment." "Rodriguez," Doyle replied, "your behavior was exactly what we needed to maintain my cover. If you had treated me differently, you might have compromised the entire operation." "I know you've said that before," Rodriguez said, "but I still feel bad about being dismissive and condescending to someone who was actually more qualified and experienced than I was." Doyle smiled slightly. "Rodriguez, the fact that you feel bad about your behavior suggests that you learned something important from this experience." "I definitely did," Rodriguez agreed. "I learned not to make assumptions about people based on their apparent rank or assignment, and I learned the importance of treating everyone with professional respect." Chief Williams joined the conversation, carrying a folder of paperwork related to the ongoing investigation follow-up. "Sergeant Doyle," he said, "I've been reviewing the final investigation reports, and I want you to know that your work during this operation was exceptional. You maintained your cover perfectly while gathering crucial intelligence that led to a successful prosecution." "Thank you, Chief," Doyle replied. "It was a challenging assignment, but the results justified the effort." "What's your next assignment?" Williams asked. "I'll be returning to OSI headquarters for debriefing and preparation for future undercover operations," Doyle explained. "There are, unfortunately, many situations that require this type of investigation." Rodriguez looked concerned by the implication. "Are you saying that theft networks like the one we discovered are common problems?" "More common than most people realize," Doyle confirmed. "Military technology theft is a significant national security concern that requires ongoing investigation and enforcement efforts." Colonel Morrison entered the hangar, carrying official paperwork and wearing the expression of someone who had important announcements to make. "Technical Sergeant Doyle, Chief Williams, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," he said formally, "I wanted to personally deliver the official recognition for your contributions to this investigation." He handed each of them official commendation letters that documented their roles in the successful operation. "Additionally," the colonel continued, "I want to inform you that the investigation you supported has led to arrests and prosecutions in 4 states, recovery of stolen military technology worth over $500,000, and identification of foreign entities that were purchasing our classified components." The scope of the network they had helped disrupt was even larger than they had initially understood. "Sir," Rodriguez said, "it's amazing to think that what started as a routine inspection led to such a significant law enforcement operation." "Rodriguez," the colonel replied, "that's often how important investigations develop. Small irregularities and professional attention to detail can uncover major problems that threaten national security." Chief Williams consulted his notes. "Sir, what's the current status of the other installations that were affected by this network?" "All have implemented enhanced security procedures and are conducting comprehensive audits of their inventory and documentation systems," Colonel Morrison replied. "The lessons learned from our investigation are being applied across the Air Force to prevent similar criminal activity." Technical Sergeant Park joined the group, carrying updated investigation reports. "Sir," she said, "OSI has confirmed that the network we disrupted was responsible for stealing military technology that was being sold to entities in 3 different countries. The intelligence value of this operation extends far beyond the immediate criminal prosecutions." Doyle nodded. "The network had sophisticated methods for identifying vulnerable personnel and exploiting weaknesses in our security procedures. Understanding their methods will help us protect against similar operations in the future." Webb, who had been released pending his sentencing hearing, approached the group with obvious nervousness about facing his former colleagues. "Sir," he said to Colonel Morrison, "I wanted to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to help catch the people who put me in such a terrible situation." The colonel studied Webb's expression carefully. "Webb, your cooperation was essential to the success of this operation, but you need to understand that cooperation doesn't eliminate the consequences of your actions." "I understand that, sir," Webb replied, "but I'm grateful that I was able to help prevent these criminals from continuing to threaten other people and steal more technology." Rodriguez looked at Webb with a mixture of sympathy and disappointment. Webb, I'm sorry that you felt like you couldn't come to me or Chief Williams when you first started receiving threats. We could have helped you handle the situation properly. I know that now, Webb said, but at the time, I was terrified that involving anyone else would make the threats against my family worse. Doyle had been listening to the conversation with professional interest in the human factors that contributed to security vulnerabilities. Webb, she said, your case demonstrates the importance of robust reporting procedures and support systems for personnel who find themselves under pressure from criminal organizations. What do you mean? Webb asked. Military personnel need to know that they can report threats and coercion without fear of career consequences or inadequate protection, Doyle explained. Your situation might have been prevented if you had felt confident that reporting the initial threats would result in effective protection for you and your family. Colonel Morrison nodded. That's exactly why we're implementing enhanced reporting procedures and support systems across the command. We want to prevent future situations where personnel feel like they have no choice but to cooperate with criminal activity. Chief Williams consulted his watch. Sir, we're scheduled for the final debriefing session with OSI in 30 minutes. Right, the colonel said. This will be our final opportunity to provide input on lessons learned and recommendations for preventing similar situations. As the group prepared to attend the final debriefing session, Rodriguez looked around the maintenance hangar with new appreciation for the complexity of security challenges in the military environment. 6 months ago, I thought my biggest concern was ensuring that aircraft maintenance was completed on schedule, he said. Now I understand that we're responsible for protecting national security technology from sophisticated criminal networks. Rodriguez, Doyle said, that understanding will make you a more effective leader and a better protector of the technology and personnel under your supervision. I hope so, Rodriguez replied. This experience has definitely changed my perspective on the importance of security awareness and professional vigilance. Webb looked around the hangar where his criminal activity had been discovered, and his cooperation with law enforcement had begun. I know that my actions cause serious problems and put people at risk, he said, but I hope that the investigation and prosecution that resulted from this case will help protect other military personnel and prevent similar criminal activity. Colonel Morrison placed a hand on Webb's shoulder. Webb, the fact that you chose to cooperate with law enforcement despite personal risk demonstrates character that will serve you well in whatever path you choose after your military service. Thank you, sir, Webb replied. I plan to use this experience to help other people avoid making the mistakes that I made. As they prepared to leave the hangar for the final debriefing session, Technical Sergeant Doyle took one last look around the facility where she had spent 6 weeks undercover, gathering intelligence that led to a successful counterintelligence operation. Chief Williams, she said, working with your maintenance team was an educational experience that will help me in future undercover assignments. Sergeant Doyle, Williams replied, your professionalism and dedication during this operation impressed everyone who worked with you. I hope our paths cross again in the future. Rodriguez approached Doyle with obvious respect for her skills and experience. Sergeant, if you ever need a reference for your future assignments, I would be honored to provide one. Your work during this investigation was exceptional. Thank you, Rodriguez, Doyle said. I appreciate that offer, and I'm glad that we were able to work together to resolve this situation successfully. As the group left the maintenance hangar and walked toward the administrative building for their final debriefing, the aircraft around them represented both the technology they had successfully protected and the ongoing security challenges that required constant vigilance. The A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft that had been the focal point of their investigation now stood as silent sentinels, their weapon systems secure and their operational integrity restored through the dedication of the men and women who had refused to let criminal activity compromise national defense capabilities. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the flight line, illuminating the complex machinery that represented billions of dollars in research, development, and manufacturing. Each aircraft contained technology that foreign adversaries would pay substantial sums to acquire, making them perpetual targets for criminal networks willing to exploit any vulnerability in security procedures or personnel integrity. The successful disruption of the theft operation had prevented sensitive military technology from reaching hostile entities, but it also served as a reminder that such threats were persistent and evolving. Rodriguez walked alongside his colleagues with a newfound appreciation for the broader implications of his daily responsibilities. What had once seemed like routine maintenance tasks now carried the weight of national security considerations that extended far beyond the immediate operational requirements of the squadron. His experience with the investigation had transformed his understanding of the critical role that every military member played in protecting the technological advantages that kept American forces superior to potential adversaries around the world. Chief Williams observed the aircraft with the perspective of someone who had witnessed decades of technological advancement and the corresponding evolution of security threats. The systems he had worked on throughout his career had become increasingly sophisticated and valuable, requiring enhanced protection measures that went beyond traditional physical security to include comprehensive personnel screening, behavioral monitoring, and counterintelligence operations like the one they had just completed. Technical Sergeant Park maintained her professional composure while internally processing the satisfaction of a successful operation that had required months of careful planning and coordination. Her role as both an overt maintenance supervisor and a covert intelligence handler had demanded exceptional skill in balancing competing priorities while maintaining operational security that protected both the investigation and the personnel involved. The success of the operation validated the effectiveness of integrated approaches to counterintelligence that combined traditional law enforcement methods with sophisticated undercover operations. Webb walked slightly apart from the group, carrying the burden of someone whose mistakes had created serious problems, while also knowing that his cooperation had contributed to a successful resolution. His experience would serve as a cautionary tale for future security training programs, demonstrating how criminal organizations exploited personal vulnerabilities to compromise military personnel. The lessons learned from his case would help develop more effective support systems for service members facing coercion or threats from hostile entities. Colonel Morrison led the group with the bearing of a commander who understood that successful leadership required constant attention to both operational excellence and personnel welfare. The investigation had demonstrated the importance of creating organizational climates where personnel felt confident, reporting security concerns without fear of career consequences. His command's response to the crisis had become a model for other installations facing similar challenges, proving that professional leadership and systematic approaches to problem-solving could overcome even sophisticated criminal threats. The investigation that began with a torn uniform and an exposed tattoo had evolved into a multi-state law enforcement operation that disrupted a significant threat to national security. The seemingly minor incident that revealed Doyle's hidden identity had triggered a cascade of discoveries that ultimately protected military technology worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and prevented its transfer to foreign entities seeking to reverse engineer American defense capabilities. The case demonstrated how small details and professional vigilance could uncover major security threats that might otherwise have remained hidden until irreparable damage had been done. The lessons learned from their experience would contribute to enhanced security procedures that would protect military technology and personnel for years to come. Training programs would incorporate the methods used by the criminal network to identify and exploit vulnerable personnel, while support systems would be strengthened to provide alternatives for service members facing coercion or threats. The investigation had also highlighted the importance of systematic documentation and inventory procedures that could detect theft operations before they reached critical proportions. Technical Sergeant Doyle's undercover assignment was complete, but her work protecting military technology from criminal networks would continue in future operations at installations across the country. The skills and experience she had gained during this investigation would inform her approach to similar cases, while the professional relationships she had developed would provide valuable resources for future counterintelligence operations. Her success in maintaining cover while gathering crucial intelligence had established her reputation as an exceptional operative, capable of handling complex and dangerous assignments. The dedication and professionalism demonstrated by everyone involved in the investigation represented the best traditions of military service and commitment to national security.
Thank you for being part of our EV story. Here, we tell story about simple women with hidden strength and deep courage. So, if story inspires you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. We will see you in the next story.